You know, giving is one, perhaps the most primal form of worship. Long before God's people engaged in songs or prayers or even preaching, God's people would gather in the temple and bring gifts to God. They called them sacrifices, offerings maybe we would call them, but it is a fundamental, primal kind of form of worship. I'm not a preacher who talks about money a lot. In fact, in my almost 7 years here, I've done it twice. And I'm not going to talk about money today, but as we reflect on things, I have been charged, and I want you to know that we are a church that is on the move, a church that is growing, a church that is trying to engage with people far and wide and close by with the beauty and the goodness of this gospel message. And at times, we do ask you to make sacrifices to help us in that mission. We've already asked you to make a sacrifice, and you didn't even know it. I don't know if you know this. I know you don't know this, except for the fact that you probably shivered for a few weeks. You see, for the first 8 weeks of this year in this room, 5 of those weeks, we did not have heat in this room. And we didn't have heat in this room because the mechanical units associated with this room are 20 plus years old, and they now have, essentially, we are on borrowed time with them. We continue to patch them. And I let you know this I say this to you to say this. Your gift giving here, when you make an offering to Chesterfield Baptist Church, it is first and foremost, maybe only it should be, about worship. God says that he loves a cheerful giver, and when you give here, we don't ever want you to do it out of compulsion. We don't ever want you to feel like you have to do it. That is between you and Jesus and no one else. That being said, we also sometimes want to help connect the dots. I don't think anybody in this room is so foolish as to think that, you have to keep the lights on, right? And you have to keep the heat on. If you ever want to see this, by the way, we keep a little thermometer in that window right there. That's why Donna Wilson, our chairman of our church board, sits next to it every week so she can keep an eye on it, make sure the room, right, Donna? That's right. And just so you know, a lot of Sunday mornings, we have heat in here now, by the way. Our facilities team, by the way, led by Charlie Sullivan and Walker George and Lawrence Kunkel, have done just yeoman's work making sure that we are not still freezing in this room. But lots of mornings in January and February, the first thing I would do when I got to church was walk in here, and that little thermometer would read 55, 56 degrees. And we're scrambling then going, please, sun, come out, because these windows help. But we want you to know that this year, in 2025, it is our goal, our desire, to fix this problem. And we're going to want you to partner with us in that. We're going to need you to partner with us in that, because we want this to be a space that is not distracting. And I know we've had some mic issues and bugs today. There's always going to be squirrel kinds of stuff going on around here, right? But we want you to be able to walk into this space on Sunday. We want anyone to walk into this space on Sunday morning and be able to engage God, be able to connect with the Jesus that loves them. And so if you want to start being a part of this now, you're welcome to do it, but I just want you to know in the coming weeks, in my 7 years here, this has nothing to do with me, by the way, but our facilities team under the leadership of first Lawrence Kunkel, then Walker George, and now Charlie Sullivan, I kid you not, we have replaced every HVAC unit in this building with the exception of the sanctuary. And it's time to get it done. So that's coming, and I just want you to be aware of it. Because giving is about your worship. But we also want you to know that when you give, how it makes a difference. That we want to help connect the dots to what it is that you're contributing to. Let's move on to the topic at hand. If you have a Bible, I invite you to turn with me to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to look at verses 13 through 16, Miss Francis. 13 through 16. But I want to start by telling you a story from the late 15th century. In the late 15th century, just outside of Nuremberg, Germany, there was a family there where the dad was a goldsmith. And despite the fact that the man worked with gold every day, he didn't make a lot of money. In fact, his family was quite poor. He would always pick up odds and end jobs. He would work 18 hours a day as a goldsmith, but he would pick up odds and end jobs over the weekends or whatever it was to try to make sure that his family could stay afloat, that he could keep food on family. Now, where he went wrong, and this just is what it is, the man had 18 children. He had a lot of mouths to feed in his home. And so he worked all the time. And because of that, his children grew up poor even for their day in the late Middle Ages. And they quickly, as they became of age, looked for ways to support themselves as well. But those children, particularly the oldest two boys, a young man named Albrecht, and then his next brother, Albrecht and Albert, decided that they needed to get out of this situation altogether. And what they really wanted to do was become artists. It's the Renaissance. These things are starting to take shape all over Europe, and they wanted a part of it. They believed that both fame and fortune awaited them. But to become the kind of artist they needed to become, they needed to go to the academy in Germany, the big deal college university that would teach them to be artists. And here was the catch. There was no way they could both go and do it and support themselves. So they hatched a plan. Outside of in their little town there, just outside of Nuremberg, there was a coal mine, and they decided that the best thing that they could do was that one of them would go and work in the mine and support the other brother as he went off to the academy. And then, after 4 years in the academy, that brother would come back and he would work in the mines or support his brother however he might, so that he could then go off to the academy and learn to be an artist. So they flipped a coin or drew straws or whatever it is they did, and Albrecht won the draw. He got to go to the academy, which meant Albert had to go into the mines. Now, Albert goes off to the academy and almost immediately is recognized for his genius. He is quite the artist. We know him today, Lily, if you'll put up his picture, as Albrecht Dürer. He was an artist, mostly sketches and wood carvings, but he was preeminent in his day. Immediately, folks at the academy, his professors recognized that here was a budding genius, and they did everything they could to instill whatever they could into him. But by the time he graduated from the academy 4 years later, he was already famous. He had achieved the fame and even some of the fortune part while he was still a student. His artwork was beloved all over Europe. And so after 4 years in the academy, he returned to his little village on the outskirts of Nuremberg, a hero, a celebrity, and fairly prominent. He hadn't seen any of his family, any of his 17 brothers and sisters, his mom or his dad, since he had left for the academy, so he planned a big feast for them. They camped out on the lawn of the modest home there, and he put just this massive feast that his family had never, ever experienced before together, and they ate, and they drank, and they enjoyed one another's company for hours. Albrecht, of course, is the man of the hour, and so he's seated at the head of the table, and after several hours of revelry, he stands up with a glass in his hand, and he says, "I need to make a toast to my brother Albert, because I wouldn't be seated here if it weren't for him. And so now, dear Albert, it is my turn to repay you and send you to the academy so that you too may accomplish your dream." Albert sat down, and Albert hobbled a little as he got out of his seat, overcome with emotion, tears streaming down his face. And he looked at Albrecht, his older brother, and he said, "Brother, I'm so glad for your success. I take great pride in what you have accomplished. You have earned it, and you deserve it. But my 4 years in the mines have totally shattered my hands. Every bone in them has been broken at least once. They are now twisted and mangled, full of arthritis. There is no academy in my future." And with that, he sat down. Albrecht Dürer would go on to be one of the preeminent artists of the Middle Ages. His works now are worth millions of dollars. But there he got because of the great deed and service. We celebrate his art today in places like the Louvre and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. But Albert Durr would have been a poor miner, but for the good work of his brother. Our world would be less, its beauty diminished, had Albert not made the sacrifice he made. I don't know if you care about medieval art, but I find that to be a potent story of what it looks like to be the kind of people who shine light and who bring flavor and seasoning to the world. Our text today comes from the Sermon on the Mount. We are still there. We've talked about the Beatitudes for the last 4 weeks, these promises of blessing, and we move on to the very next text in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' most famous sermon, the most famous sermon of all time, the best sermon of all time, if I were to be so bold. A text that digs deep, and we have moved from blessing, moving towards redefining what it means to live a faithful life. But there in the middle is the thesis statement of the Sermon on the Mount. Many scholars will look at the text we've read today and treat it like a transitional passage, a passage that gets us from the Beatitudes, from the blessings, to the thesis itself. But I think this text is far more important. I think this text is actually a part of the thesis, because the Sermon on the Mount is about what it looks like to walk the path that Jesus has called us on. And this, after proclaiming blessing, are the first words Jesus has to say to us, disciples, church, Christians, about what it looks like to follow him. And he begins like this: you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything but thrown out and trampled underfoot. Salt is about as simple as one could get. Would you agree? And I have no interest in taking you through a chemistry course, but salt is fundamental. Several years ago, my wife and I on a date night went to Sur La Table over at Stony Point Fashion Park. It's not there anymore. It was the kitchen store, and they taught cooking class. Anybody ever done a cooking class with your spouse? Are you still married? Okay, all right. My wife and I went and did this cooking class together, and we learned some great techniques. It was a lot of fun. We worked with another couple at our workstation, and I'll never forget the chef who was instructing us that night told us, this is true, and so if you have high blood pressure, don't listen to anything I'm getting ready to say, but he said at every step along the way of our cooking journey today, you need to add salt. And he did the whole meme thing, did that whole deal, right? And he told us, he said, look, when it comes to adding seasoning to food, you add salt every step of the way. And I remember somebody in the class said, well, hey man, first, isn't that going to be too salty? But secondly, if you add some seasonings, they'll burn along the way. And this guy, chef, looked at this guy like he was an absolute idiot, but I'm going to be honest, I had the same question this other dude did. And he said, you ain't got to worry about salt burning. And this is a quote. He said, you know why? Because it's a rock. It won't burn. Put it in the pan. You can clean it out later with stuff you don't. Add salt every step of the way. Incidentally, salt actually never loses its saltiness, which raises the question of what Jesus is saying when he says if the salt loses its saltiness, it's not good for anything but to be thrown out. We'll talk about that in just a second. Salt in the ancient world in Jesus' day had a lot of purposes, but I want to talk about 3 of them really briefly to kind of give you a perspective that everybody would have known in Jesus' day that helps us understand what this material really meant, why Jesus might say that you and I are the salt of the earth. First, salt in Jesus' day was a valuable commodity. It was a commodity. In fact, the Roman military often paid its soldiers in salt. Could you imagine? Dude, could I have a drachma? Could I have $1? Something salt? But it was so needed for the animals and for the soldiers, it was actually paid to them. Because it was paid to them, the Latin word for salt is the word sal, S-A-L. It is where you and I get our word salary today. Now, you might not have known that part, but you know this part because they said it in the first century as well. That dude ain't worth nothing. He ain't worth his salt, right? The Latin word sal goes to the French word soldat. It is where we get the word soldier today. Any soldier of any value was worth his salt. Salt was a valuable commodity. It was a form of payment. It was itself money. To be claimed, to be challenged with the idea that you are salt is to suggest that you bring value to the world. It is to suggest that you, your life, your investment, your contribution to the world is itself currency. It matters. It makes a difference. Salt had value. The second issue is the same issue that Chef, the second purpose of salt is the same issue that Chef at Sur La Table that night had for me and my wife. Salt is a seasoning. It brings flavor, right? Salt makes food taste good. I don't want to speak ill of anybody in my family because I got some good folks in my crew, but I got to tell you this story. That's a poor setup, isn't it? So we have this practice in my family where when it snows, we go to a family member's house and we all play in the snow with them. That's what we do. And obviously, January and February were a good time for this. Now, part of the practice in our home is when we go over there, we're going to do 3 things indoors in addition to all the playing in the snow outdoors. And the 3 things we're going to do indoors, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make cookies. Love it. Really happy about that one. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to make good homemade hot chocolate. Some of the best stuff I've ever put in my mouth. Absolutely delicious. I mean, it's the kind of hot chocolate you got to wait like half an hour before you can actually drink it or you're going to burn every taste bud in your mouth. It's just amazingly good. Rich, smooth, cocoa-y, marshmallows, whatever. We do the whole works. It's great. The third thing we do is we make chili. That's our lunch or our dinner meal. Except the family's house we go to hates flavor. And so I ask you this question, brothers and sisters. If you don't put chili seasoning in a chili, is it really chili? No, it is not. Thank you. Chili has chili seasoning. Otherwise, it's beef and bean soup. That's all it is. But because of where we go, there ain't no seasoning in the pot. And so I kid you not, the first snow day we had and we went over there, I suffered through it. Cheese, sour cream, salt, pepper, we just loading it up. I got to have something. But the second time I went over there, I told my wife, I said, I am not going to be caught with my pants down this time. So for Christmas, I had gotten a bunch of hot sauces. And so now, unbeknownst to the people's house we go to, I have now hidden like 5 bottles of hot sauce in their pantry. And so the next time I have food over there, particularly chili, we're gonna add a little seasoning. Salt is flavor. Salt is seasoning. And we live in a bland world. We live in a world that desperately needs some flavoring. Jesus says that you are the salt of the earth, and what you bring to the world, what you bring to our society, what you bring to your neighborhood, your job place, your community is flavor. Some of us are moving in the world, and we don't ever think of ourselves as making a difference, as bringing any life, any joy, any purpose. And if you don't, you are missing the point of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. We are flavor for the world. Now, can we all agree you can oversalt something? I know I'm from Virginia, but I ain't a big fan of Virginia ham. I love ham. I ain't Jewish. I love ham. But there is such a thing as too much salt. Virginia ham happens to be it for me. If you like Virginia ham, no judgment, just meet Jesus. We need flavoring. And we need to be the kind of flavor in the world that doesn't over-season. This is kind of like what I said last week. It's not blessed are the jerks, it's blessed are the persecuted, right? Some of us keep throwing salt into the world, and eventually we're going to make food uneatable. We're going to make the world uninviting. We're going to look like people who are anything but flavor, and more like what armies used to do when they wanted to ensure that a village never was able to grow crops again. They would salt the fields, essentially over-fertilize the fields so that nothing could grow there for years. You are flavoring. The third thing, and perhaps the most obvious one, in a world before refrigeration, in a world before other types of preservatives, salt was a life-giving, life-sustaining nutrient. Salt made sure that food could last and life could endure. And this might be the most important use of salt in the ancient world. Now, in the first century, the ancient Israelites, the people of Jesus' day, had the world's greatest repository of salt just 40 miles to their southeast, in what today is known as the Dead Sea. It's called the Dead Sea. Why? Nothing lives there. Why does nothing live there? Because it is the saltiest body on the face of the planet. People go there for the salt, for the kind of exfoliating skin properties. People talk about when you lay on the surface of the Dead Sea, you float higher because the salt is so dense in the water. The first century Israelites and the rest of the world had the easiest reservoir of salt they could possibly find. You could simply put a shovel into the side of the Dead Sea and have all the salt you would need for a year. And it mattered in a dry, arid climate, where it was hard to preserve food, where it was hard to ensure that the fish or the beef that you might be eating, the lamb that you might need, would take and keep for the next 2, 3, or 4 weeks. Salt was a life-preserving ingredient. Make no mistake. I kind of said something similar in my Sunday school class this morning. Make no mistake. Our God is the author and guarantor of life. He is pro-life from his start to his finish, from beginning to end. And when I say pro-life, I mean it in every way imaginable. This God seeks to preserve, sustain, and nurture life. That is who he is. You and I are called to be the same sort of preservative in a world that constantly holds death over our head, bludgeons us, and bullies us with it. You are the salt of the earth. Now, it turns out that salt from the Dead Sea wasn't pure salt. It didn't lose its flavor, but it was mixed with lots of other substances, other minerals, other contaminants. And so over time, as salt dissolved or as it was used, as it evaporated even, salt became less salty. And whatever was left in the bottom of that bin that any ancient Israelite might have had that they used for preservatives or seasoning would become less and less salty in its flavor, because it would become more and more, at least by volume, at least by percentage, these other substances that were found in the Dead Sea. And as Jesus points out, when that happens, it's time to go shopping again, because what you have in the container is no longer good for anything. We have no purpose for it, and so it must be tossed out. And it is fascinating that Jesus looks at you and I and says, you are the salt of the earth, and then challenges us, proclaims to us, says to us, if you're not careful, you can lose your value. Not your inherent worth, but your value as a currency, as a way of bringing purpose to the world. You can lose your flavor. And let's tell the truth, church. I mean, we're a church in 21st century North America. We're not exactly known for being the most interesting people around, are we? We can lose our seasoning. But perhaps worst of all, we can lose the ability to preserve life. You are the salt of the earth. The second thing Jesus proclaims about us is that you are the light of the world. Now, this is a fascinating text only because over and over again in the Gospels, Jesus says that who is the light of the world? He is. He says, I am the light of the world. But here in the Sermon on the Mount, right at the beginning, he says, no, not just me. You are the light of the world. You have within you the same thing I am bringing to the world because, frankly, I'm going to put it in you. Jesus says, you are the one that's going to illuminate, make things clear, help people see better. And then he says, look, let's tell the truth. Now, in their day, light pretty much solely came from the sun or a flame of some sorts, whether it be a candle, campfire, oven, it didn't matter. It was a flame of some sorts, right? They didn't have an incandescent bulb. They didn't have an LED bulb. I think it goes without saying 2,000 years ago. And so Jesus says, you don't hide a candle under a bushel basket. That ain't going to do nobody any good. It's it's going to snuff it out. But then he also says, you're also not going to put it where? Under your bed. Do you know what it means to put an open flame under your bed? It meant the same thing in the first century it would mean today. It's completely stupid. Nobody would light and put an open flame under their bed. Anybody want to take a guess what's going to happen? My wife and I, that cold spell we had in January, we have one toilet in our house that has plumbing that runs down the exterior wall of the bathroom. And so twice, we've been in the house 2 winters now, and each winter that toilet has frozen. And you know, we're very fortunate. We have 3 other bathrooms in the house, so like nobody's like holding it in, right? We're good. Don't worry. But it is an inconvenience. It's the master bedroom. It's right there. And so I did everything I could initially. I used a heat gun and some other things to try to get that pipe thawed out. And so I just finally had this idea one day. I was actually talking to one of our facilities guys here who by the way, is to his credit, very skeptical of space heaters because they are known to cause fires, right? And we had a space heater. And so I decided I was going to stick this space heater in the little closet where that toilet is and just turn this joker on. And I put one of those thermometers in the bathroom. And the beautiful thing about that thermometer is it's Bluetooth enabled, it connects to my cell phone, and I can keep track of it. Except I turned the space heater on and totally forgot to track it. By the time I remembered, anybody want to take a guess how hot it was in my bathroom? This is the honest to goodness truth. The bathroom got to 94 degrees. But the toilet worked. Can we all agree that was a dumb thing to do, Pastor Sammy? Yeah, really stupid of me, right? Putting a candle under a bed was a dumb thing. It was as stupid to do in the first century as it would be to do in the 21st century. Jesus says that thing is supposed to be held up to bring light to the house, bring light to the... In fact, Jesus says, you know what we ought to do? We ought to put that light on a hill and shine it to the whole world. Let as many people see as possible. That is what you are if you follow me. The challenge is, church, is that fewer and fewer of us tend to be light, and what we do instead of casting light is more and more of us are casting shadows. But you're to bring clarity and visibility and vision to the world. That's what we're supposed to be about. And so Jesus sums it all up by saying in verse 16, in the same way, let your light shine before others so they may see your good works. So that they may see your good works. And as a result, glorify your Father in heaven. Albrecht Dürer would do a pencil sketch towards the end of his life that would become so famous, even if you don't know who he is, I guarantee you know the image. Albrecht Dürer decided to draw his brother's broken, twisted, arthritic hands. And this was the image he drew. Albert gave us the hands that became the dominant image for the rest of Western Christianity for the next 500 years of what it looks like to pray. By the way, when Albrecht did this drawing, he just called it the hands. But today, if you want to find this picture, you're going to have to do a Google search for the praying hands. Albert Dürer's good work has brought glory to God for over 500 years. In the early part of the 19th century, there was a political party that sprung up in the United States. It was a nativist party, but not like for the Native Americans. It was nativist for those early immigrants who were of British descent who came to the United States. And this party was really more concerned about a growing number of Catholics moving into the United States. And they became known. I don't know if you've ever heard of them before. They became known to history. They didn't last very long. They ended up being an alternative to the Democratic Party right as the kind of newly formed Republican Party was coming on the scene in the 1840s and 1850s. But this party became known as the Know Nothing Party. You ever heard of them? Yeah, their primary concern was about growing Catholic influence. As would happen all the way through, the 1960s, there was this concern that Roman Catholic influence on the country could be bad if you had too many Roman Catholic voters or too many Roman Catholic politicians who ultimately had their allegiance to the Pope and maybe not to the country, right? There was all these concerns. And the Know Nothing Party was one of the first parties that developed around that being a major political issue. And the reason they got to be known the Know Nothing Party was they were told by their leadership when people would ask you questions, just say, I know nothing. They didn't last very long, and you can imagine if you're a political candidate, even though most of them seem like they really don't know anything today, that you know your campaign platform being I know nothing is probably not going to be a winning platform, and sure enough, they didn't win. The challenge, church, that I bring that up for is we cannot be a do-nothing church. I was with a group of friends not too long ago who all attend here, and to their credit, we were talking about our church and where we were going and what we're up to. And they expressed concern about whether or not we are living into our calling, whether or not we have lost our saltiness, whether or not we're an open flame under the bed rather than being a light on a hill. I've been challenging our leadership for the last 3, 4, 5 months here at the church to ask the question of why we exist. Why are we here, men and women of God? I did this in our members meeting back in early February to anybody who showed up. And my question is the same to you. Why are we here? Because we ought to be bringing life and flavor and illumination to the world. I challenge you that we are here to offer as many good works to a world that is full of bad ones as we possibly can. And not so that folks might put us on the news or folks might pat us on the back, but so that folks might look at us and we can say to them, we do this because of the God who has done it for us, so that we can point people back to Jesus, back to God, back to the kingdom that is coming, and saying, this that we do is just a small taste of what God intends for the world ultimately. A 100 years from now, I don't think many are going to remember my name or your name. My guess is before you walked into the room today, you didn't know the name Albert Durer. But you've seen his hands. And his hands have shaped you, especially if you've ever done this. Our job is to be a do-something church. Our job is to bring flavor. Our job is to help people see more clearly by illuminating the world. Our job is to offer the world goodness. And I hope you're with me. I hope you're ready for it. And I hope you'll join in. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And if you be those things, God will be glorified. Amen.